bronze lock gleams under the light of a gas lamp. It is October in New York. The year is 1907. The hand that turns this key every morning belongs to Charles T. Barney, president of the Knickerbocker Trust Company, the third largest trust company in the United States. This lock opens the doors of a building on the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street, where thousands of New Yorkers keep their savings, their dreams, their children's education, the retirement they imagined in silence. This morning, Barney's hand trembles, not from the cold, but because he knows something the depositors do not yet know. Something that, within a few days, will make every one of these people rush to that same door, desperate to withdraw every cent before there is nothing left. But to understand how the greatest city in the world came to the edge of the abyss, we must go back a few weeks. We must meet two men whose names history nearly forgot, and a plan as ambitious as it was foolish. Fritz Augustus Heinze was not the kind of man who accepts limits. The son of German immigrants, he built a fortune in the copper mines of Montana, using tactics that ranged from brilliance to illegality. Lawsuits, bribes, industrial espionage. Heinze dominated the copper of the American West, not because he was the best miner, but because he was the most ruthless. And when copper was no longer enough, he looked east, to Wall Street, to the banks. At his side was Charles W. Morse, a man who had already monopolized the ice market in New York City, controlling something as essential as water in the summer. Together, Heinze and Morse had a plan that, on the surface, seemed brilliant. They would corner the shares of the United Copper Company, forcing short sellers to buy back the stock at inflated prices. A short squeeze. A financial trap as old as the markets themselves, but one that no one had ever attempted on that scale. The mechanism was simple in theory. Heinze believed that speculators were selling United Copper shares they did not own, betting on a decline. If he bought every available share, those speculators would be forced to buy from him at whatever price he set. The fortune would come quickly, cleanly, and devastatingly for his enemies. On Monday, October 14, 1907, the attack began. United Copper shares rose from $39 to $52 in a single day. Heinze smiled. The plan was working. On Tuesday, he ordered the short sellers to deliver their shares. It was the moment of truth, the moment when his adversaries should beg, and he would dictate the terms. But no one begged. The short sellers found shares elsewhere, shares that Heinze did not know existed. The house of cards collapsed within hours. On Wednesday, United Copper shares plummeted from $52 to $10. In 3 days, Heinze lost everything. And if the story ended here, it would be just another anecdote about greed on Wall Street, an arrogant speculator who bet big and lost. But the story did not end, because Heinze had not gambled only with his own money. He had gambled with the bank's money. Heinze controlled or held influence over 6 national banks, 10 state banks, and 5 trust companies in New York. These were not abstract vaults. They were the places where teachers, shopkeepers, immigrants, widows, and factory workers kept every cent they owned. And when the news of Heinze's ruin spread, a question began to circulate through the bars, the street corners, the kitchens of Manhattan. If he lost everything, what happened to our money? Fear is a nocturnal animal that feeds on silence, and that week, New York was silent. No one in government spoke. No authority explained. There was no central bank, no deposit insurance, no safety net. Every depositor was alone with their uncertainty. And uncertainty, when left unanswered, becomes panic. On Monday, October 21st, the National Bank of Commerce announced it would no longer accept checks from the Knickerbocker Trust Company. It was a death sentence disguised as a technical notice. Charles Barney, the president of the Knickerbocker, the same man whose hands trembled as he turned the lock, was forced to resign. His crime was not fraud, it was association. He knew Heinze. He had dined with Morse. And in the world of financial panic, suspicion is as lethal as proof. On the morning of Tuesday, October 22nd, the line began before dawn. Men in bowler hats and women with children in their arms formed a queue that stretched for blocks along 5th Avenue. Every person carried the same terror in their eyes. Every person wanted the same thing, their money, all of it, now. The tellers at the Knickerbocker worked frantically, counting bills, stamping receipts, emptying the vaults with the silent efficiency of those who know they are witnessing the death of an institution. In less than 3 hours, the Knickerbocker paid out $8 million in withdrawals. By 2 in the afternoon, the vaults were empty. The doors closed. Outside, hundreds of people still waited. Some wept, others shouted. Most stood in silence, staring at the closed doors the way one stares at a grave. The domino effect was immediate and merciless. The Trust Company of America was next, then the Lincoln Trust, then smaller banks, investment houses, brokerages. The New York Stock Exchange lost nearly 50% of its value compared to the previous year's peak. Healthy companies could not obtain credit. Factories shut down. Workers were dismissed. The richest city in the world was breaking apart, block by block, bank by bank, life by life. And in the midst of the chaos, one man watched from his mansion on Madison Avenue. John Pierpont Morgan was 70 years old, a bulbous nose disfigured by rosacea, eyes that seemed to calculate the weight of the world. Morgan was not a hero in the romantic sense. He was the most powerful man in American finance, the same man who had built empires of steel and rail, the same man many accused of being the very embodiment of unchecked capitalism. But that week, he was the only person in the United States with enough money, enough influence, and enough nerve to do something. Morgan began with diagnosis. He summoned the finest accountants in New York and sent them to examine the books of the Trust Company of America. The question was surgical. Is this bank solvent? Does it hold real assets? Or is it an empty shell? The answer came at dawn. The bank was solvent. It had assets. It simply had no liquidity. It was dying not because it was weak, but because everyone was withdrawing at the same time. Morgan acted. He assembled a consortium of bankers and injected money into the Trust Company of America, not out of charity, but because he knew that if one more bank fell, the chain of panic would become irreversible. But money was not enough. The panic had grown larger than any vault. On Thursday, October 24th, the president of the stock exchange rushed to Morgan's office with a desperate message. If $25 million did not arrive before 3 in the afternoon, at least 50 brokerage firms would close, and the exchange would have to suspend operations. That had never happened. Morgan took 16 minutes. In 16 minutes, he summoned the presidents of New York's largest banks, explained the situation, and secured $23,600,000. The money reached the trading floor at 2:16 p.m., 44 minutes before the deadline. The traders, who had already been preparing for the end, erupted in applause when the announcement was made. But the longest night was still to come. On Saturday, November 2nd, Morgan discovered that the city of New York was about to declare bankruptcy. The municipality needed $30 million, and no one would buy its bonds. On Sunday, he discovered that one of Wall Street's largest brokerage firms would collapse on Monday, dragging down with it whatever remained of market confidence. The only solution was for United States Steel, controlled by Morgan, to acquire the Tennessee Coal and Iron Company, which the brokerage had used as collateral. But this acquisition could violate antitrust laws. Morgan needed the approval of President Theodore Roosevelt, a man who had built his political career fighting exactly men like Morgan. And it was at this moment that the most extraordinary scene of the entire crisis unfolded. On Sunday evening, Morgan summoned the presidents of every major bank and trust company in New York to his personal library on Madison Avenue. The library was a palace of marble and mahogany, with ceilings painted in the Renaissance style, Persian rugs, and a collection of manuscripts that included original works by Da Vinci. Morgan let them in, and then he locked the doors. No one would leave until an agreement was reached. The trust company bankers needed to contribute $25 million to save the weaker institutions. Some resisted, others protested. Morgan smoked his cigars in silence, seated in a chair near the fireplace, playing solitaire while his advisors negotiated. From time to time, he would rise, walk to a reluctant group, and speak in a low voice. No one recorded exactly what he said, but one by one, the bankers signed. At 4:45 in the morning, the last trust company president signed the document. Morgan unlocked the doors. The wealthiest men in New York stumbled out onto Madison Avenue as the November sun began to lighten the horizon. On Monday, Morgan received a telegram from the White House. Roosevelt approved the acquisition of Tennessee coal. The market survived. New York survived. The United States survived. Charles Barney, the president of the Knickerbocker, did not survive. On November 14th, alone in his apartment on Park Avenue, he pointed a pistol at his own chest and pulled the trigger. He died the following day. He was 56 years old. Fritz Heinze, the man whose scheme started it all, was tried and acquitted for lack of evidence. He died in 1914 at 44, ruined and forgotten. Charles Morse was sentenced to 15 years in prison for bank fraud, but received a presidential pardon after feigning illness. He lived until 1933. And J.P. Morgan, the man who saved the American economy, died on March 31, 1913 in Rome, at the age of 75. 7 months later, on December 23, 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act, creating the Central Bank of the United States. The message was clear. The most powerful nation on earth could not depend on a single man, however extraordinary, to prevent collapse. The system needed an institution, a permanent safety net, a mechanism that would do what Morgan did, but without needing Morgan. Today, the Federal Reserve oversees the monetary policy of the world's largest economy. Its chairs move markets with a single sentence. Its decisions affect the price of bread in countries most Americans could not find on a map. All of it was born in that locked library, on that November dawn, when a 70-year-old man with a disfigured nose and a deck of cards in his hand decided that the system would not fall. Not that night. The bronze lock of the Knickerbocker Trust never turned again to open its vaults to the public. The building still stands. Today it houses a luxury clothing store on the corner of 5th Avenue and 34th Street. Tourists walk past it every day without knowing that there, in October of 1907, the world as we know it nearly ended. This documentary is based on historical research, interviews, and verifiable sources. Images and videos generated by artificial intelligence were used to illustrate and dramatize historical events.